this image here is, if you put the glasses on, you can see the 3D from Hector Soon's work. And I remember when he was here in the museum, when we were down.
Tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and what first brought your attention to the Shroud of Turin.
Well, in 1976, I was the production manager for a company called Interpretation Systems Incorporated out of Lawrence, Kansas. We made a machine called the VP8 image analyzer. Two people in New Mexico at Sandy Laboratories in Alamogordo had witnessed the first plot of brightness variations using a VP8 image analyzer and made a wonderful discovery concerning the Shroud. And very soon after that, two people from the Air Force Academy showed up at our factory and asked if one of those machines could be donated to them for some research they were doing. And to everyone's surprise, they donated it. And they looked for a volunteer to go install the equipment. And I have relatives that live in Colorado Springs, so I raised my hand. I said, "You'll pay for the gas, I'll take it out there." I met a gentleman named Captain John Jackson from the Air Force Academy and Eric Jumper from the Air Force Academy. And they had both witnessed what happened when you scan a VP8 image analyzer over a Shroud of Turin image. That was my first introduction because I installed that equipment for Captain John Jackson and Captain Eric Jumper at Eric Jumper's house in Colorado Springs. And they asked me to show them what the operation of the isometric projection was with this image that they had.
Or tip it up so that we're looking at all lines or individual lines, and we can tilt, tip, change the relief, and rotate the image. And if we do that with the Shroud, we find out very quickly that that image is 3D.
And they hand me the image, I put it under the camera, and I'm fiddling with the knobs on the VP8, and all of a sudden I'm looking at a three-dimensional image of a person. And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "The Shroud of Turin." I said, "Okay, what's that?" That was my introduction to the Shroud. I haven't left it since, and that was 1976.
Well, I was visiting my cousin and his wife, their family, up in Colorado Springs in 1997. And we were looking for something to do. And Connie found out that John Jackson had a museum in his basement. So we called and he allowed us in, and that was the first time I saw the Shroud. My real exposure to the Shroud was when my good friend Pete asked me to make the website for this museum back in 2009. And I created the website, and it had nothing on it. We had no information. I didn't know anything about the Shroud. So I started reading books. They would have speakers to the museum, and I would listen. I would ask the speakers, what would you recommend to read about the Shroud? So I've read a number of books about the Shroud. And sitting in front of the Shroud caused me to desire more virtue, and was part of my journey to be a deacon.
That's a good segue. How long have you been a Christian, and what, if any, impact has the Shroud had on your walk of faith?
Well, I was born and raised Catholic, and when I was 20, I left the church. I wasn't very well catechized, and so I started then. I was Protestant for 3.5 years, and I read the Bible. I studied the Bible 3.5 to 4 hours every day for about 3.5 years. And then when I came back to the church, started my catechesis. My catechesis, I did it. I found books on every subject, and I read them all, and learned the teachings of the faith. And so that was my formation as a Christian. My intersection with the Shroud in 2009 and following, when I sat in front of it and I realized things that I would never have realized if it wasn't in front of an image of Jesus, was he called me through the Shroud to be who I am. So I wouldn't be a good deacon today if I didn't have those experiences, all of them. Being raised Catholic, leaving the church, coming back, experiencing Jesus in the Shroud, experiencing Jesus in my friends. And so, he's a part of that. So is Barry Schwartz.
Well, I was born and raised Catholic, and in 1976, I probably wasn't very deep in my faith. The Shroud encounter was a definite reawakening of my faith. And I built those machines. I delivered them all over the world. I know what it does and what it doesn't do. And here was something that I was confronted with that just doesn't happen with other images. And that led me to start digging much deeper. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't a big slap in the face and all of a sudden I'm, so steeped in my faith I'll become a deacon. That didn't happen until 2009 I became a deacon. So my journey of faith has been always progressing and continues to progress. Just thank God for God's patience and His mercy.
Amen.
And how did God call you into the deaconate?
Well, I was at church in Arlington, Texas, and we had been praying for more vocations to the priesthood and diaconate, religious life. And praying every week, and we had families that would take a little simple home and put it on their table in their house and pray for vocations at their dinner. Well, I was sitting in the pew after just having received the Eucharist, and it was kind of an amphitheater type of church arrangement. And I saw all these people flowing down to receive communion. It was just almost like a euphoric experience. I was so joyful to see all these people coming down to enjoy the Eucharist. And all of a sudden it was like someone was talking behind me, and I heard this, nobody's raising their hand. Okay, and I looked around, and there was nobody there. And 2-3 pews back, there was nobody there. And continued watching, and I heard, again, nobody's raising their hand. It was almost insistent. What is that all about? And then it dawned on me that nobody was answering those prayers. No, we've been praying in our parish, but nobody had signed up for diaconate. Nobody had signed up for priesthood or seminary or any. And it was like, nobody's raising their hand. What about you? That was a huge moment of change in my life. I went home and explained the experience to my wife. And the funny thing was that she said, well, I wonder what took you so long. It seems like women always know. But that was it. That began the journey to the diaconate.
So my wife and I met online. It was like the first chat room before there were chat rooms, and that's where we met. And we married, and we had a friend named Sandy from Canada, and so we were all on the phone right after we got married. And my wife said, you should become a deacon. That's 25 years ago. And Sandy said, yeah, you should become a deacon, She was from Canada. And that's where it started. I knew that I didn't want to be a deacon, because I knew that I would take all of my foibles and put them on display on the altar. I didn't want to do that. But later, I felt called. And part of that call was my experience with the Shroud. And so because of that, I did a personal retreat. I went to San Patricio, a retreat center about an hour from here. But it was during a snowstorm, and I was going anyway. And there were only 3 people there. There was me, the director of the retreat house, and a Mexican maintenance man who didn't speak any English. And so we would have, the director and I would take meals together, and we would talk. And the rest of the time, I was just by myself, studying and praying. And it was after that retreat that I decided that God was calling me. And my desire was to preach and to bless people and things. That's really where it started. The Shroud just gave it a kick in the pants.
Tell us about the Shroud of Turin itself, a brief historical overview, and any of the medical and scientific studies.
What would you like to talk about? My favorite part is
such a huge topic.
Yeah,
it really is. That's extraordinarily broad. Obviously, from the historical overview, we take it back to the Mandylion, which takes us back to the cloth of Edessa, which takes it back to the very short period of time after the resurrection, when Thaddeus, also known as St. Jude, takes a cloth bearing an image of Christ, not made by hand, presents it to King Abgar V. He was suffering from leprosy. He's cured of his leprosy, and he, by his edict, allows people in his kingdom to follow Christ. And that was an extraordinarily dangerous and different thing to do at that particular time in history. So it has historical overview, wow, and look at all the things that have happened since, and we can track that with pollens and pictures and icons and soil and all kinds of other things that we know from the tests that were done in the largest scientific expedition ever to study a single artifact. And that was what began in New Mexico in 1977 at a meeting in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So all of these things take us back over a very broad amount of time, clear back to the time of Christ. The only thing that was ever done, that was ever said that might be contrary to that, was the carbon dating of 1988. That has since been soundly refuted by a number of different means. And it was sad that that happened, because a lot of people were pinning their faith on one test, and that test was carbon dating. And to pin your hopes and your faith and all of that on one thing, that's a sad thing to do even now when we know what we know about the Shroud. Your faith should be built on what we understand about Christ and his presence on this earth, his redemptive actions that he did for us through the suffering and death, his passionate love for us, which is so clearly exhibited in the Shroud itself. As far as the medical evidence is concerned, it's anatomically, physically, medically, metabolically, chemically, in every possible way, 100% accurate image and evidence of a person who has been treated exactly as Jesus was, as we read in every account, both in the New Testament, even those things are from, for example, Isaiah, the prophet, which was many hundreds of years before Christ came. So, in terms of scientific studies, there are so many things still going on. It's not over. He's still revealing himself and his message to us through the Shroud of Turin.
I also like a lot of the forensic evidence. The travertine argonite, the dirt that's on the image, on the nose, on the knees, and on the bottom of the feet. So when Jesus carried the cross, more than likely, they would have tied his hands over the cross beam. So when he fell, it would have fell on his knees and then on his face. So he had the dirt in those places. There's a lot of forensic evidence that shows quite clearly, that this image is quite amazing. We had an online interview with Joe Marino and a couple other Shroud researchers, and what they wanted me to give a presentation, and they wanted me to talk specifically about the forensic evidence and answering the Muslims who say that the man in the Shroud was not dead. The man in the Shroud was most certainly dead, because all the blood fluoresces, which means that the bilirubin inside the body broke down before, and when the bilirubin breaks down, that means you're dead. When the spear wound went in the side, blood and water came out separately, St. John says. And that means that he was dead, because it wouldn't have come out separately if he were alive.
How, when, and why did the Shroud exhibit in Museum of Alamogordo come about?
In 2008, I came here to retire in Alamogordo in 2006. But 2 years later, a guy named Barry Schwartz, who I knew from the Shroud of Turin research project back in 1977, called me up and asked me if I still had one of those VP8 image analyzers. And I told him, well, Barry, I've got one in my garage. Doesn't everybody? And he kind of chuckled. I said, what can I do for you, Barry? He said, well, I got a call from the Discovery Channel, and they'd like to make a video from the VP8 image analyzer to show what the 3D process is on the VP8. I said, okay, send them down. So in 2008, in October, the Discovery Channel showed up with a film crew. We took the VP8 image analyzer and a very small table full of equipment that I had, and we went to the public library here in Alamogordo, and we shot a segment for the Discovery Channel. That aired for the first time in 2008 in December, and it was called Unwrapping the Shroud, New Evidence. Well, if you bring a film crew from the Discovery Channel to Alamogordo, New Mexico, you're going to cause some stir, okay? It's a big deal. So one of the persons who knew me was with the Chamber of Commerce, and he said, you ought to be showing that equipment somewhere. And I said, okay, find me a window somewhere, and I'll put it in the window. And he said, no, you need to be doing more than that. So he introduced me finally to the person who ran White Sands Mall here in Alamogordo, or a local shopping mall. And about 15 minutes, half an hour into that conversation, he said, would 1,900 square feet be okay? And I said, no. I said, I've got a little table full of equipment. He said, well, I don't care what you do with the rest of the space. So then I kind of thought maybe he's trying to rent me space in the mall. And I said, I can't afford 1,900 square feet in the mall. He said, I didn't say anything about affording it. And so we were donated 1,900 square feet across from the Hallmark, next to the J.C. Penney, next to the recruiting office, prime location in the mall, with everything paid. But I've got a little table full of equipment and 1,900 square feet of space. He said, why don't you go home and pray about it? Okay, so I went home and my wife and I prayed about it, and we realized that was a huge gift. It was a huge gift. So I called up Barry and I said, I want the best scientific grade image that you can possibly get me from 1978. And so we purchased that from Barry and we formed a nonprofit and we opened the Shroud Exhibiting Museum in February of 2009. And since then, a lot of things have happened. Tens of thousands of people have come through the museum and hundreds of thousands of people probably on the website. And we've had people come from Italy, from France, from Panama, Central America. We had a film crew come here from China to do a documentary in Chinese for evangelization of Christianity in China. We've had pilgrim tours, busloads of people come. It's been totally God's providence. None of this did I plan. I came here to retire in 2006.
Yes.
And people keep asking me, how's that working out for you? So I'm having fun. I really am, because I love Christ and I love doing what I do and I love showing other people the Shroud and its mysteries.
One of my favorite parts of that story is when he realized that he couldn't afford the insurance. And the Bishop Ramirez found out about it. He said, oh, don't worry, we'll pay the insurance. So he was out of excuses.
I couldn't even afford the insurance on the building. So what are we going to do?
After he opened the museum, he met with me and asked me to create the website. And I've spoken a little bit about this before, but when I created the website, there was nothing on it. It was just an empty page, pretty much. And I had to learn, and I would go and do searches, and I would send the information to Pete, who would explain to me why, well, this doesn't have anything to do with the Shroud, and this is good information. So I learned slowly but surely, and that's how the website also matured as the museum matured. They kind of went together. And now,
And it all grows, yeah.
and now we've had visitors from 139 countries come to shroudandm.com. Yeah.
And how many of you help operate the museum?
We have a lot of people who have been volunteers over the years, so we have people that come and go. Sometimes it's because we're kind of a military community here, so we have people that come in and they're here for a while and then they're transferred to some other base somewhere. We have a lot of people who have come in and they were some of our older volunteers, and some of them have passed away. But so we have young people and old people. The youngest we had was 12 years old, and she did a wonderful job of putting together a presentation on the Shroud.
Krista.
Yeah, Krista, and she did a beautiful job of that. So it's, volunteers, volume goes up, volume goes down, but we always seem to have people we need to have.
Are there other suggestions for preparations that visitors can make before coming to optimize their experience? And is there any other information you feel may be useful for people in learning about the Shroud?
One thing I would say is it depends on what they want to know. If they go to shroudandm.com and they open up the slideshow on the Shroud, the 180 slides, they can see in categories of information like photo processing, history, scripture, forensic, they can see different categories of information, and by seeing that, they can decide really what would be important, the things that they're interested in, that they want to know about. If they do that before they come, then they can better target their visit. But there are some people who just, tell me whatever it is you want to tell me. It's an exciting adventure, so you get all different kind of people. But for those who are driven to have a purpose, I want to come to learn about this and this about the Shroud, that would be a good way to do it, is to do that, or to read a book about the Shroud and then bring your questions.
I think that's it, is to, come with some foreknowledge of the Shroud, no matter where that is coming from, and I highly recommend bona fide sources. people that have done actual research on the Shroud, that have been jury papers or other sources of information that are considered as accurate and unbiased. That's good. That's a good start. And then come with your questions and come with an open mind. But do plan on spending at least an hour in the museum, because once you get started, the questions will just flood.
It's really hard to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like if you're on a 20-minute time crunch, you want to watch the movie and maybe look at some things and leave and come back later when you have more time. Thankfully, it's free, so you can come back as many times as you want.
And those who want to do a tour should let us know in advance, because we have a limited amount of space here. We can get additional space and do separate presentations. We also can do presentations in other locations. I've done them as far away as Vancouver, British Columbia, and Missouri, and all over the place anyway. And so we have a portable exhibit, that's fine. But if you're planning on coming here, with a group, just let us know in advance. We will do our best to make your experience as enjoyable and as accommodating as possible.
One thing I did is I developed a talk called The Visual Gospel. And when we had more space, it was easier to do with a big group in front of the Shroud. It's kind of narrow now. But what I would do is go through the gospel passages that describe what you see in the Shroud, so that you not only read about them, but that you can see what it looks like. If we look at the passages like Zechariah, they will look on whom they have pierced. And the prophecies in Isaiah, and a bunch of different places in the Old Testament. And you can see what that looks like on the Shroud. When you do that, then the scriptures come alive. Kind of like when you watch The Chosen, or a movie about Jesus or something. You can see it acted out, and then it really brings to life what you read in the Bible. So that's a really useful way. If that's how you're oriented, that would be a great way to learn more about Scripture.